Morning, everyone. I keep those of you who've been here for a number of years, you know we have some chimes that go off usually on the hour, and we haven't heard them yet this summer. So I have to look at my watch, and it's so anyway. Welcome to, as you've heard all week long, the 52nd season of the Utah Shakespeare Festival. Yesterday I got twisted up, and for some reason I was saying the 56th. I don't know where that came from. But for those of you who left immediately after I said that, it's not the 56th, it's the 52nd season of the Utah Shakespeare Festival. And thank you so much for being here. My name is Nancy Mielich. I am the Literary Seminar Director here at the festival, beginning my 10th season here in the Grove under the pine trees. In the fall, we're over behind the Randall. But let me just ask if there's anyone here this morning who has never been to the Utah Shakespeare Festival before now. Welcome. Where are you folks from?
West Valley.
Okay, well, that's Utah. Florida. Yeah. Right here. Yeah, David Wakay, our assistant here in the Grove, who's a graduate in the graduate program in arts administration here at SUU, as he just said, is from Tampa, Florida. Yes, very good. All right, before we get started, let me just say a couple of things. The 9 o'clock hour is reserved for talking about the shows that were on the Outdoor Adams stage last night, 9 o'clock. 10 o'clock, we talk about the shows that are on the Randall stage. So this morning, 9 to 10, we're here to talk about King John. From 10 to 11, we will be talking about Anything Goes. The other announcement, and we're here every day of the week except Mondays, never on Mondays at the Utah Shakespeare Festival, but always on Sundays and the other days. Today, in that building, directly behind us, the Braithwaite Fine Arts Center, the annual Southern Utah Invitational Art Exhibit opens. And the hours are 10 to 8 in that building. And there is a reception tonight at 6 o'clock. If any of you are so inclined, I think you would enjoy the exhibit. There are two exhibits, one featuring over 150 works by Southern Utah artists. Some are very well known, others will be well known, I'm sure. In the smaller gallery, there is an exhibit of scenic designs and how you create scenes for the Utah Shakespeare Festival. So that's in the second gallery over there. There's no charge, but of course, donations are always welcome. All right, so to this morning, as many of you know who come here either preview week or opening week, we are fortunate to have the directors of the performances with us. And Robin Rodriguez is a newcomer to the Utah Shakespeare Festival, and I was just talking to her. I thought this was true, but I wanted to make sure. This is her directorial debut of any Shakespeare play, of any play. I told her I think she hit the ground running, but we'll let all you decide this morning. And with us is her assistant director, Caitlin, and I'm going to say Washington, but it's not right. Lushington. Caitlin Lushington is here too, also first time, right, at the Utah Shakespeare Festival. And Robin is an actor, and I've had the privilege of seeing her at the Oregon Shakespeare Festival in a couple of plays. The one I remember most recently is August Osage County, and she's a force to reckon with on the stage. She, I believe, 22 seasons with the Oregon Shakespeare Festival. We're so glad that she came down from the Northwest to be with us to direct King John. We have only presented, I shouldn't say we, the Utah Shakespeare Festival has only presented King John one other time in 1998. Under the direction of Russell Trays, with an actor named Sheridan Criss playing King John. I was looking at that note that Russell wrote, and he said that he gets petrified when he directs history plays, that there's so much to know from history, and then you take a hold of this play that Shakespeare wrote. And what did he do with it? And Russell said that one of the ways he kept things straight was he started chanting all the names of the people in the play versus the history of what was real and what wasn't real. Anyway, I don't know if any of you saw that production in 1998. David Ivers was in that production, who is our one of our artistic directors here. Anyway, Robin Rodriguez, welcome to the Utah Shakespeare Festival.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, so
Ashland, Oregon. Yeah.
So I think we'll begin by asking Robin if you will tell us, for your directorial debut, why you wanted to pick this, why you picked this play. I think it probably was already established and then they came to you. But then also, I know you love history, and could you give us some information about how you entered this play that Shakespeare plays fast and loose with the facts?
Sure. First of all, a little bit of background, I think, on how I got this rather challenging job. David Ivers, in 1991, was an intern at the Oregon Shakespeare Festival. I didn't work with him, but he was a nice young guy, and he invited me out to coffee one day because he was thinking about going to grad school, and he was asking people's opinions about whether or not he should do that. I recall that I encouraged him to do that, to go to grad school. And I remember that it was a lovely coffee and that he was a lovely person. And over the years, we would cross paths, run into each other. But in 2005, we were both acting together at the Oregon Shakespeare Festival. And he and his wife, Steph, lived across the hall from me in company housing. And during that time, I realized that as an actor, as I was getting older, that you know, it's inappropriate when you're acting with anyone to tell them what to do. Or to say to a young actor, you know, if you took a really deep breath before you said that line, I think you would find a connection emotionally to what your character's doing. And so I was finding it frustrating as I was getting older not to be able to have a bigger voice in the process. And we're at a time in American theater where it's not fiscally possible a lot to support even someone you're committed to support that artist's artistic growth. So in that season in 2005, I applied to the directing program at the Yale Drama School. And David remembered that. So in February of last year, I was working at the Berkeley Repertory Theater in Berkeley, California, and I got a phone call out of the blue from David, who said, "Hi, thinking of you. I'm here in Cedar City having coffee. Do you ever think about directing anymore?" And I said, "Oh, yeah, you know, I've come close, but it hasn't worked out." So long story short, about 2 months later, he called me and asked me to pitch a production of King John. Okay, here's the deal. When you want an opportunity to grow creatively, and you want an opportunity to direct professionally, you're not going to quibble with what they're offering you to do. Now, if I had chosen a play for my directorial debut, would I have chosen Shakespeare's King John? Probably not. But it was the opportunity that was on the table in front of me, and frankly, I've discovered that if the plays are about history and or politics, I'm probably the happiest theater person in America. So it was a challenge and continues to be, but one that I was kind of thrilled to unlock. And when people would say, "What? You're going to direct for the first time and it's King John? Are you crazy?" Then the next thing would be, well, at least nobody knows it. So if it's terrible, you know, they'll blame the play. Or they'd say, well, nobody knows it, and so they'll think you hit it out of the park, regardless of what you do to it. So that's how it came about. That said, I don't understand why the play isn't produced more often, frankly. Yeah, it's thorny. All of the history plays are. But they're intensely interesting to me. Because guess what? Aside from all the political stuff that, you know, yeah, we should Wikipedia some of this stuff, or read Peter Sacho's book on Shakespeare's English kings. There's a new book by a man named Dan Jones about the Plantagenets. There are lots of sources to go to if you want to know a little something about the world of these plays. That's thrilling. These are family dramas. These people are related to each other. And what's fascinating to me is the dysfunction of the family is reflected in the challenges of the country. And it was ever thus. It's still with us today. And so what's interesting about King John, of course, it stands alone in terms of the history plays, much like Henry VIII does. It's not like it's a tetralogy, like, you know, the Richard going into the Henrys. But nevertheless, I think there are rich characters, and the dilemma is one that is still with us in an amazing way. I mean, here's a person who probably would be the better ruler for the country in that he's an adult, and he spent most of his adult life in England. John did. Arthur, a child who spent his life in Brittany. So what we know historically is that the nobles were more inclined for John. But John is a challenged human being for a lot of reasons. And, you know, he's the villain of the Robin Hood stories, for example. He's that pathetic youngest son of Henry II and Eleanor of Aquitaine, if any of you have read The Lion in Winter or seen the film or saw the play on stage. Of course. And so are Oliver Stone's movies. I mean, we play fast and loose with history all the time for its entertainment value. King John, like most of Shakespeare's histories, are political plays for Elizabethan times. And this one in particular. Elizabeth, by the time he wrote this play, was in her seniority. She had about 5 or 6 more years to live, and she had still not named an heir to the throne. So here's a cautionary tale. Richard I wasn't clear about who he wanted to succeed him. That's a fact. And so what happens? The world turns upside down. So.
Very good. Thank you. Okay, comments, questions?
I really enjoyed it. The only comment I had was like for blocking at the beginning of the second act when Constance is doing her monologue. I couldn't see her at all because the prince is standing there blocking her.
Yes.
And either way,
Where were you seated?
on the main floor over on the left east. Yeah. So,
yeah, we had a blocking snafu that happens in previews. So believe me, I took that note.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you.
Okay, I wanted to say two things. First of all, like most people, I had never seen it before. I thought it was masterfully done. The whole thing, I felt like Richard came across like a reality show. I mean, not Richard. John came across like a reality show contestant. He was so worried about popularity that he almost forgot anything else. But with your directing and Mr. Jones' acting, my word, I sympathized with him. I was so with him. Yes, I also sympathized with the man with many names. We'll just call him the bastard. I was with him too, and I understand that we were supposed to, but I definitely, I understood John's problem. And there were times when I thought, I can see why you're doing that. So masterfully done. I really liked it much more than I expected to. I expected to be conflicted about it, and instead I was like, I can see why they're all doing this. I thought Melinda chose to play Constance as what my students would call a witch with a capital B. It's a very interesting portrayal, and I could see why she would choose that. I could see other ones. My one thing, I end up being critical. This is terrible, telling you what to do. I felt cheated in the curtain call because I wanted to clap longer. I wanted to clap for the stars as well as just everybody in a line. And I know that there were gals next to me, I didn't know them, and they felt the same way, like, but, oh, that was abrupt. And so that was how I left. I felt cheated right at the end, not because the ending of the acting didn't work for me. It did. I felt, yes, the young prince, and we're going to support him, and we're here with this fictional bastard character who's everyman, and then I felt cheated because I didn't get a clap long enough. So, yeah, so I loved it right until the very end. And then I felt cheated in the applause.
Okay. Can I say about the role of Constance? Constance is known as one of the fierce mothers, one of the great fierce mothers, and one of the great roles for any actress in any of the Shakespeare plays. The one thing to remember about her is that while everyone calls her crazy, and while everybody calls her ambitious and self-serving, here is a woman who understands that if her child does not get that crown, he is dead. He is too much of a threat as long as he lives, unless he is in power. And because France and Austria capitulate and make that alliance with John and with England, that child is doomed. She's a Cassandra. She knows that if this thing doesn't go through, something horrible will happen, and it does. And those men who call her mad and married to grief have a big problem. Because any woman of power, any woman who has a rational argument and is passionate and emotional about it, of course, gets written off as being nuts. But she's not. She's a genius, and as powerful as Eleanor, but without the advantage of having a son or a husband or a father in power. So one of the great parts for any woman, and we're so lucky to have Melinda play that role. Yeah.
Did you ever discuss in rehearsal, you've got Eleanor, who is the mother of a king, who's very ambitious too, but did you ever discuss whether Eleanor's fear was for the death of any of her sons, as Constance is if her son doesn't become king?
Perhaps, yes, because Eleanor is married to power. Eleanor of Aquitaine, the woman of an age, really. But, you know, here's a woman who was making alliances with sons against sons, with sons against her husband, you know, her entire life. So does she worry for John and losing that power? I think so. But she's had the advantage that Constance never has had of being in power her whole life.
And Geoffrey died when Arthur was just an infant, correct?
Yes, he died in a tilting, jousting, I keep making that mistake, accident. Yeah.
I had a question that's somewhat political. Yeah, the way that John ordered or suggested the death of Arthur, and then denied it. How did he get away with that? How did Shakespeare get away with that when he was doing this before the Queen, who did the same damn thing with Mary Queen of Scots?
It is an amazing thing that he got away with it. It is because, frankly, it was the death of Arthur, even more than the Magna Carta in many ways, that really sent him on a downward spiral. He could never get past, much like Henry IV never gets past the death of Richard II. He could never atone for that death. Yeah. And Elizabeth, well, we all know what happened with she and Mary Queen of Scots. So he got away with it. I don't know how he did.
I had another question about you probably weren't exactly there when people were chosen for the positions, or were you? How did you choose King John?
Well, I didn't get to choose my cast, but I will say that I saw Corey Jones play Othello at Shakespeare Santa Cruz about 4 years ago, and thought he was magnificent. So when I heard that he was cast as King John, I was thrilled.
Well, he was magnificent, but
Yeah.
he didn't look much like a Plantagenet.
That doesn't matter to me. Yes.
On the back row, yes. It's traveling.
Yes, I wanted to say I was very impressed with the play, and I really sympathized with what is it, Melinda's character, her grief for her son, knowing what was going to happen to him. I was just really very drawn to her performance, and not only that, but the young boy, the 12-year-old. He was fantastic, and I wish we could have applauded more for him and for her. They were the two performances that really affected me.
Well, that's lovely to hear. Bailey Duncan is a gifted 11-year-old. He is quite something, and I must say that Caitlin here has worked with him in ingenious ways. So he's been thrilling to observe as he develops as an actor, you know.
When you envision casting that role, even though I know that you don't cast the shows, did you consider having a adult actor that could portray a 12-year-old because of the length of the run and because of the outdoor space and the need for volume?
No, I never did. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that the relationship between Hubert and Arthur is very specific. And so you feel that if Arthur were a young man, it wouldn't work. It wouldn't be an appropriate relationship. And so it really feels more that it must be a child. I have worked before where the Arthur was cast as a young adolescent girl. And so Bailey, for me, it was nerve-wracking because he is so young, but boy, is he game. And he's just working himself very rigorously.
I was here last year, and I don't remember if what happened last night concerning the one line versus individual. I thought that was maybe because it was only the dress rehearsal, therefore people didn't come out individually, or is that how it is all the time here in the summer?
Well, let me put it this way. I come from a resident company in Ashland, Oregon that does not have a policy for individual calls at Curtin. That there are no stars. that we are an ensemble of players who are, and in a play like King John, where alliances shift all the time, and yes, there are people that have bigger parts than others, there are so many people on that stage that have really integral, very important roles, that I felt that for our purposes, it was most appropriate to have a company bow. The most important people are in the center. So there they are. John comes out first. But I am listening here, and we have a few more days to tune it up, so.
That is the situation here, at least as I have been told. There are no stars at the Utah Shakespeare Festival. It is an ensemble company, and the ensemble, both off stage and on stage, makes what happens. It's just the actors get to take the bow, but it has been tradition, at least as long as I've been here, for the entire company. I mean, they don't all come out. They come out individually. That's, I mean, you have to walk in a line, sort of. But as Robin said, you can sort of tell by who comes out first or who comes out last, too. And I guess it's director's choice. But they all are there and don't step out to take individual bows because it is a rep company. Where's the mic?
Oh, okay. Hi. Do you have any theories as to why the play chose to ignore the Magna Carta?
Now, I can't articulate it extemporaneously. Sorry. I'm not a historian. But the Magna Carta in Shakespeare's time was, no one cared. It got written. John was taken to task. But rulers that came afterwards, they played fast and loose with it. It's more important to us as a nation than it was, and consequently, Shakespeare did not find it that, I mean, that you have the nobles rebelling against John is in the play, but the actual signing of the document was not important to him in terms of telling of this story.
It seems, as you alluded to earlier, that the story may be more important to the Elizabethan audience, talking about succession.
Yes.
And Elizabeth being on the throne and hadn't picked a successor.
Yeah, I mean, well, the real theme about the play is legitimacy in government. And she was challenged like John was. John was used during Elizabeth's time as kind of a heroic person, as a ruler that was challenged in the ways that she was challenged by the church, the Catholic Church, by the Spanish. We talk about Lewis's Armado in King John, but of course we know in Elizabeth's time it was the Spanish Armada. So the Arthur, Mary Queen of Scots parallel. The fact that John had a tyrant father in Henry II, much like Elizabeth did with Henry VIII. So the challenges of her reign were thematically brought into the mix here in King John. When I pitched the story to David and Brian, pitched my version of the play, the glib thing I brought up was that if you were to do a modern production, a conceptual production of King John, could you not stage the play in front of a complete backdrop of Barack Obama's birth certificate, for example? Or what would have happened to us as a nation had Al Gore contested the Supreme Court decision during the 2000 presidential election? So issues of legitimacy in government are with us, and King John is, as a story, is illustrating that. And the character of the bastard, who's fictitious. The thing that's kind of glorious about that last speech he has in the play, which Churchill used a lot, is this idea of that a government is legitimate if the people agree to it. And which is, you know, John Locke. So that's thematically one of the great aspects of Shakespeare's political thoughts that are going into King John.
I'd like to know more about that child. Is he from here? Where is he?
He is a local boy. He's the oldest of 5, and he was in the season.
He was in, well, I first saw him in Music Man. He didn't have any speaking lines. Well, one. But he was, when he was on stage, you just kept your at least I kept my focus on him a lot. And we had Brian Vaughn as Harold Hill. So that's a challenge to pull focus from Brian Vaughn, who was wonderful as Harold Hill. But he was also last year in To Kill a Mockingbird. He's been in our production of Winter's Tale. And he was the Truman Capote character. Dill in To Kill a Mockingbird last season.
And another thing, I like to see how directors stage things and do things on stage. I love the way you had him falling off that balcony.
Oh, good.
That was
Thank you.
awesome.
That, talk about a challenge with King
cool.
John. It's like, okay, how do you do King John? How does the boy fall?
Yeah.
The idea of, we could put a pillow in the trap and hope that he jumps and makes
that was
it.
Great.
You could do a fireman's, carry with a blanket. But the other thing I had in my mind was the idea of the fall lingering.
That was cool.
That as he's falling, that and that idea kind of came from the Harry Potter books, because when Harry, with his wand, with Voldemort, and their wands meet, his parents and all these people come out. The idea of your life passing in front of you came to mind, and so we made this decision. Ultimately, I thought of using the stairs, but that's proved to be impossible. And so Rob Morgan, our scenic designer, really had the genius idea of having the trap come all the way up so that he could essentially be caught and carried to his death with the illusion of a fall.
And it was cool that those men came out emotionless, like tools, and so they didn't detract from the child. It was brilliant.
Well, I'm glad you felt that way. We love the fact that it's the French and the English. That he's being ripped apart by both sides, emotionally at least. Yeah.
Comments back. Oh, yes, go ahead, sir.
Can I just ask really quickly, what kind of a costume budget did you use on this play? That Cardinal's costume must have cost $1,000, $1,500.
Well, I don't have the numbers here in my head, but can I just say that Bill Black, who designed the costumes for King John, is a wonderful designer, and he's making a lot work. You wouldn't believe how many of these costume pieces are bought online, and then they're augmented. It looks quite sumptuous, I think.
And the lighting design on those costumes by Donna Ruzicka is quite extraordinary, too, I thought. Yes.
Yeah, hi, Lance Clyde here from Tucson, Arizona. I actually caught the 98 performance of King John.
Oh,
so,
wow.
Fun. I thought it was really clever the way you had Arthur come out at the beginning there. Kind of like a little ad-lib. I'd never seen that before. And it kind of reinforced that he was a child. And then finally when he had a statesman part, you felt like he was acting that part. He really was the child you portrayed before. And then I wanted to ask you about how you decided on the ending. I've read about how you can do like the patriotic ending, more like like you did, or more of a forlorn, how do we ever get out of this mess kind of ending. I'd like to know your thought process, how you did that.
Yes, it didn't occur to me that it was tragic at the end, really. I mean, it's sad that John dies, and it's very sad that he's poisoned by that monk. But what we have is a transference of government at the end of the play. We have a character in The Bastard who he could usurp. He's the most powerful person. At this point, he's in charge of the army of England and a great warrior. But he doesn't try to take the power from John or from John's son. He says very eloquently that in order for England to thrive, England for itself, it's the greater good that he is interested in working toward. And so what we have at the end of this play is the dawning of a new day and a new age and a new realm. And what we know about John's son, Henry III, is that he was a much more beloved king than his father was.
Go ahead.
Can you hold and then we'll go? She has the mic and then she can pass it to you. Thank you.
I just the death of the little of Arthur. I was wondering how much did Shakespeare play with that versus actual history. I was a little confused by that death.
Yeah, we don't know anything about Arthur's death. There are a lot of stories. One is that he tried to escape and fell to his death into the Thames. Another story is that John had way too much mead one night and went and killed him himself. We'll never know what happened to Arthur, but he was killed. He never reached adulthood. He was older. He was 17 in real life when he died. But his death, Eleanor kept saying to John, nothing can happen to that boy on your watch. And when she found out that Arthur died, she died very quickly afterward.
Just a quick comment on your thing about the bastard being able to take over. Shakespeare would have never written that simply because Henry VII was a bastard, and his claim to the throne was all based on a bastard line. So it would have been challenging all of the legitimacy of the Tudors to do that. So that would be too problematic for Shakespeare.
Nevertheless, he makes the bastard the most noble person in the play, which is fantastic.
Right.
You know?
But he wouldn't dare do that because that would bring to mind
which is why he got away with the Mary Queen of Scots inference, but not the other.
But the question I had that we were discussing is when you go to not you specifically, but when you as a group, as a production group, cast, do you already have people in mind, or do you send out casting calls, or how does that work?
Both. I mean, clearly this is a company like so many where there's a commitment to some artists. You see certain artists at the Utah Shakespeare Festival every season. But at the same time, the Actors Equity Association for Professional Actors, their union, requires that companies audition actors a number of times a year. And in addition to that, people do make plans to work elsewhere, or one is saying, well, I'm committed to these actors, but I'm looking for someone new for, say, this role. So it's an amalgamation of both.
The fact, piggybacking on that question, the fact that you have worked for 22 seasons at the Oregon Shakespeare Festival, each of those 22 seasons, I don't imagine you auditioned. They know your work, and so they would come to you and offer you something.
Yes.
Were they 22 consecutive seasons?
No, but I never left because I always left because it was my time to go on my own, like being here this summer, for example. The great thing about certain resident companies is that if they'll make a commitment to you, you know, we're seasonal players. You never know from year to year if a company's going to want you back. But what you can do, and I'm sure the actors here are given the opportunity to pitch, well, gee, I'd love to come back next season, and I'd love to be in King John, for example. But you never quite know when you get the offer, what the offer will entail, and then you never really know if the offer will be forthcoming at all. So it's always a bit of a mystery that way.
Just a couple of small observations. I happened to be catch part of the pre-orientation with Fred Adams last night. He mentioned about the Magna Carta.
Did we lose it? Keep going. Let's see.
Okay.
Okay, good.
He said that Elizabeth was having trouble with Parliament and stuff, so he just kind of hands off and didn't want to even touch it. So that was a political thing. That was something Fred mentioned. And then another thing that Fred mentioned was the fact that elder brother Bastard's father, Richard the Lionhearted, no one really knows why he is so popular since he didn't live in England for all that long. And I just thought it was interesting that my favorite character happened to be a very friendly, very happy bastard, and John was grouchy. So so I kind of wonder if and I'll give the credit to you instead of Shakespeare.
No, don't. I don't deserve any credit over William Shakespeare.
If some of the bastard's personality was a reflection of how the people were feeling about his father compared to how they felt about John, who became our villain of Robin Hood.
It very well could be. You know, one doesn't know. But I mean that Richard the First, that he exists in mythology as this great crusade-loving,
friendly, helpful.
Exactly, where he like his father Henry II, they hated England. They lived in France. So John was the one that was sent to England and held down the fort, and of course, you know, we know as parents that if you're the parent at home, sometimes you don't get to be as beloved at times as the one that goes off to the office every day. So there you go.
I just thought it was interesting that John was grouchy and the bastard was
Well, John has a
likable
lot
and
to be grouchy about.
That's
you
true.
know.
That is true.
I think one of the reasons they actually liked Richard better was because he wasn't there. Seriously, it gave them more autonomy. It gave them more ability to govern themselves. And then you get John coming in, and John wanted to do what Richard did. Richard had tax to support his wars, but he also was this magnificent warrior type thing, and they kind of liked that, but he went off and left him alone. And then John comes, and he wants to do what Richard did, but he didn't go to any wars. He just wanted the money, and he kept taxing them and taxing them and taxing them, and they really didn't like him for that.
You know, it's sort of the old that you don't speak unkindly of the dead, and there's revisionist history that goes on. I mean, how many of you have known that after someone dies and you hear you knew them before they died, and then you read the obituary and there's a real disconnect? It would be interesting to know who was the first one to paint Richard that way. Where all of that started, who knows? But
Right.
I have an idea that maybe it was somebody writing an obituary about him who loved him. Oh, yes. Do you have the mic? It hasn't made it over there. It's coming.
I'm just curious about when this play was written. Was it written after the death of Shakespeare's son, Hamnet?
We think so, yes. Which is why the Constance's text about Arthur is so devastatingly beautiful. Is that if people believe that indeed he was writing after Hamnet had died.
It had to be. That sounds just pitch perfect for a parent's grief.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Robin, do you have any idea why I haven't looked to find out how many productions there have been in the history, and of course we don't know during Shakespeare's time. There's no record of it being produced and wasn't in the folio for years. But do you have any idea, as an actor, especially a female actor, why it isn't produced more often?
You know, a lot of people find that particularly the second part of well, not that well. Once we get into Act 4 of King John, we have lost those dynamic women, and there are a lot of people that feel that it's not as interesting to follow the shifting of alliance through the end of the play, and think that the shifting of alliance through Act 4 into the end of Act 5 is a weakness of the play. Whereas, as I was getting ready for this, it was wonderful to sort of read some critical essays about, wait, the shifting of alliance is the strength of King John, that Shakespeare did know what he was writing about, and that he was pointing up this idea of I'm going to support you, no, now I'm going to support you, and as we move into the end of the play, into his death. So that's part of it. I think a lot of it, too, is, let's face it, in terms of box office, the Shakespeare history plays aren't as, they don't sell. I mean, I work at a company that's over 75 years old, and those histories, I mean, the comedies get cycled in an incredible frequency. But from, I think the last time the Oregon Shakespeare Festival did King John was 2006, and prior to that it had been 25 years since anyone had seen King John. So a lot of it has to do with box office. But the beautiful thing about Shakespeare festivals, and the thrilling thing that's happening here in particular, is that if given a chance to do them in a chronology of kingship, you're never going to see them this way. People are going to do Henry V more often than anything else. But to be able to see King John into Richard II, into Henry IV, 1, 2, you know, 5, the Henry VIs into Richard III, that is the beauty of a company like this one. And what's great is that you have to remember that, the Plantagenet family of the King John play is the same bloodline that moves into Richard II and all the way through. That the deep history of these people in terms of their DNA, in addition to what they're doing to the country, is kind of thrilling history, but it's also thrilling entertainment. So I really hope that you'll keep coming back season after season to see these plays in order, because how wonderful is that?
And you all aware of that that's what this festival is doing, presenting the history plays in chronological order? Yeah. Now you know. Okay, very good. Let's see, where's the mic? It is. Can we bring it? Okay.
Okay. I do a lot of research.
Hold it real close. We've got some
Okay.
musical background.
Okay. I do a lot of research in England, and this is not uncommon for alliances to be going back and forth, because even when we go into 1600, you've got Parliament who wants to take over, and you have a civil war that's actually taken place, and it goes on throughout all the kings and the queens. The alliances are just always that way. When you're talking about royalty, they do what they want to do for their own purposes and not always for the good of the people, and the people are the ones that suffer. And so it's been fun seeing this, because as a researcher, I get to see a different part of history that I have not yet got into.
That's great. Good.
Can I just make one comment?
One final comment. Yes, you're the. Say it like morning.
This is the first history play that has been so clear to me, and I want to thank you for your direction, obviously, and also for the precise enunciation from every actor. It was so clearly enunciated, you couldn't miss it.
And that was a fabulous production. It
Oh,
really
thank you
was.
so much.
Yes.
We have a wonderful voice and text. We have several wonderful voice and text people on our shows here, but Phil Thompson was our guiding light in terms of making the text clear and available to the actors in the mouth, which is no mean feat. And in addition, it was a really wonderful process to try to go through this text with Phil and with our dramaturg, Michael Flackman, in trying to create a real streamlined and clear and dynamic version of this play. If you read the play uncut, it's not easy.
You succeeded.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
Robin, I want to ask you finally, because this sort of goes along with what she was saying. It's always a challenge on the outdoor stage since it's not mic'd, and we get winds sometime. When you were directing it, you must sit in all different parts of the theater to get the blocking. It changes depending on the number of audience members we have. How do you, as an actor/director, anticipate audiences being able to hear the lines?
It's always difficult. It's always difficult, particularly in an outdoor environment. I mean, look, the voice is the window of the soul, frankly, and you know, voices are manipulated through through audio, and frankly, it robs an actor of part of their craft to have them mic'd. So it is our job to work on the instrument constantly. That said, given the challenges of an outdoor environment, we know that on a humid night, that the voice is going to come out of the body and flat. We know on a night that's cool and crisp with a little bit of velocity of wind, that it's going to carry. If there are fewer of you in the house, there are fewer people to absorb the sound. But if there are a lot of you in the house, we're really hoping for one of those crisp evenings. So it is always a challenge, but clarity is our first responsibility to you. So we try our best.
Clarity both in speaking the words and the actors understanding their characters, correct?
Indeed.
And judging by the response this morning, I think you have a winner in your directorial debut here at the Utah Shakespeare Festival.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Robin Rodriguez. Thank you, Caitlin, for being here. And you, Robin, will be back with us Sunday morning.
I will.
After the second preview of King John. And then opening week, Caitlin will be with us. I hope you'll all stay to see how King John changes and all the other plays. But thank you so much for being here this hour. We'll take a quick break and then continue on with Director Brad Carroll talking about Anything Goes. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody.